what's up? It's Elliot, and this video series about how to deadlift properly, or the scientific breakdown of the deadlift, was inspired by a post by Mehdi on his blog at stronglifts.com. Now, in that article, he talks about how some people believe that deadlifts are just a squat with the weight in your hands. In essence, that they're kind of the same exercise. And coaches are also coaching their athletes to perform a deadlift in the same fashion with the hips low and stuff like that. Deadlifts happen to be my favorite of all exercises, so I really want to break down the intricacies of how to perform the movement, why we perform it, and how to really maximize your potential by doing it properly. So sit back and grab a beer or something, but this is going to be a long video. You know, I'm going to break it down into different segments for you, but you might have to pause and come back. Take notes, because it's one of these videos where you're really going to be taken to another level of understanding with regard to picking heavy things up in the gym. It's not just one of my meathead videos. It's going to be a little bit more scientific in nature. So, very first segment here is I want to make sure that we all understand that deadlifts are not squats. And when I say that, there are several different reasons why, very important reasons why they're different, and the discrepancies allow for an entirely different stimulus on your musculoskeletal system, your entire body. Even the hormonal response will be different from one exercise to the next. And I'll also explain why I like the deadlift so much more than the squat. And that's not to say that the squat's not an incredible exercise, I just have a preference for it based on my body type. Anyway, so let's go through three different... Now, before I continue, most of what I'm saying may be like somewhat generalities, because there's so much information that I could divulge and we can go really deep, but most people don't have that interest. So if you're, a keyboard warrior and you want to get mad at me because I'm not giving you everything, just understand that we're doing this so people can understand and benefit from the information. So generally speaking, there are three things that I want to approach with regard to the difference between squats and deadlifts. Number one, it's the center of gravity. So there's a very big difference between the squat, where your center of gravity is over your base of support. That basically means that the majority of your center of gravity is where the weight is. And where that weight is placed based on your base of support, there's going to be a totally different musculoskeletal response. For example, with the squat, the center of gravity is directly over your base of support. So basically, the barbell and all the weight is displaced right through the middle of your foot. If you could imagine, someone's foot or even feet, and if you were looking from above, the barbell and all the weight would be right over their base of support. I hope that makes sense. When that's the case, there's a totally different... The amount of muscles that are going to be activated are much different than if you have an exercise like a deadlift, where the center of gravity is in front of the base of support. You can only imagine you're going to be at a much greater mechanical disadvantage if your feet are here. So that's your center of gravity, your base of support, and the weight is loaded out here. Hope you guys can see this. So you can imagine if you're picking up a weight that's in front of your base of support as opposed to directly over your base of support, there's going to be a great difference in how your body responds. So a lot of people who, the trap bar deadlift is a cool exercise. It's great for picking heavy things up off the floor, but it really is not a deadlift. It is a squat with weight in your hands, or like a dumbbell squat with weight in your hands. But I'd be hard pressed to call that an actual deadlift, because the center of gravity is directly over your base of support, which does not force a lot of the things that we're going to talk about next with regard to the muscle activation and intra-abdominal pressure, which is another form of muscular activation within the core and the pelvic basin and rib cage. So that is the very first distinction that I like to make. The weight is displaced in front of the base of support, and what that ends up doing is that it changes the type of muscles, and the force couples and the relationships between the muscles in the movement. So, generally speaking, with your squat, the major muscle being used is your quads. Now, depending on which personal trainer you talk to, they'd have you believe that you really shouldn't be bending your ankles and your knees in your squats. I've done videos before where I'm telling you squat with your ass down to the ground, that your knees should be going over your toes. I know I'm going to get a lot of hell for this, but we're designed to squat that way. That's a totally different story. But if that's the case, if you're bending at your ankles and your knees like you should be, the major muscle being activated is going to be your quads as you're extending up out of the movement. The glutes, the calves, and the hamstrings do play a more of a minor role, but they are integrated into the movement, along with several others. With the deadlift, because you're at such a mechanical disadvantage, you have to recruit so many more muscles. As the body tips forward, I think it's, as you start tipping forward 45 degrees or so, especially if you have a 20-degree bend in your knees, you activate what's called a force couple. That basically means there are several muscles that work together as teammates in order to produce a movement. It's not just one muscle working and then another following. There's three muscles in this particular force couple that work together to get you to lift the weight up off the floor. You've got a significant activation of the glutes, especially, like I said before, if you have a 20-degree bend in the knees. And this is very different from what a lot of people tell you to do with regard to your squats. If you watch a lot of the world-class deadlifters and strongest men in the world, like Mehdi put some pictures on his website, I'll put a link for you, or maybe I'll grab some for you. These guys, they've got their butt kind of up in the air when they're deadlifting. So when I'm using terminology and numbers here, but I want you to paint a picture for you also. When you're deadlifting, your ass is not down below your knees or even like at a 90-degree bend in your knees. It should be a 20-degree, a very slight bend, just enough. I think with a 20-degree bend, you activate about 85 to 90% of the glute muscle. So the deadlift is a huge glute exercise, and that actually happens to be the center of that force couple, if you can imagine what I'm saying. You've got your back up top that's helping, you've got your glutes down below that's helping, and your hamstrings down below, and then you've got your glutes right in the middle. And the three of those, I'm sure you can't watch me, but the three of them work really hard together to extend the hips when the joints extend in a simultaneous fashion to pull that weight up off the floor. Now, what's really incredible, and when I say squats, I'm referring to back squats. What's really incredible about the difference between the back squat and the deadlift is what's happening with the upper body as well. In order to pick that weight up off the floor, you need a significant amount of upper back strength, or the capacity to extend thoracically. That's going to bring in a lot of your rhomboid muscles, a lot of the scapular adductors, like I wrote here, scapular adductors, the muscles in the mid-back that pull the shoulder blades together. To deadlift properly for the most part, especially if you're not like your max effort deadlifting like a power lifter all the time, you're going to want to draw those shoulders down and back when pulling off the floor, or you could suffer ligament strain, especially in the shoulders. A lot of guys can't deadlift because they're really damaging their shoulders with the kyphotic lift. Now, I'm rambling a lot here, but there is some benefit to the kyphotic lift, to the rounded back lift. And I'll talk to you about that later, and that's something that you could do just to maintain a healthy spine with lighter weights. But for the most part, when you're pulling a significant weight off the floor, 80% of your max, you're going to want to draw that chest up, those deadlifts, those scapular together, activate the scapular adductors in the upper body. So we're talking legs, what's happening with the legs here, and what's happening with the upper body. So right now we're talking about like a major recruitment of the nervous system and musculoskeletal system in this exercise. I mean, it's an awesome move. Now, let's move into what's happening with regard to your core. IAP stands for Intra-Abdominal Pressure. This is really what the purpose of the core activation in these particular movements are for, to increase intra-abdominal pressure. You may be familiar with like the Valsalva maneuver when squatting and things of that nature. Well, when you back squat, when you set the weight on your spine, the need for producing intra-abdominal pressure, especially at the lighter weights, I'm not talking about major power lifters that are squatting 1,000 pounds, is not going to be naturally activated for most people. You probably have to think about it. But we've figured out that you don't have to naturally activate it, especially when you're back squatting and if you're a powerlifter, because we force it, naturally it'd be low, but we force it by using a belt. And if you talk to a lot of very strong powerlifters, they'll say, well, you know, you put on your belt and you push your belly out into the belt. Well, what that's doing is that's creating an unnatural but still valid form of intra-abdominal pressure, because the weight is set directly on top of your body. The tendency would be, because right in front of your belly button, you've got that, you should have sort of a lordosis in the spine. You should have sort of like a arching back. The tendency would be to allow the abdominal pressure to spill out, to spill forward, instead of pull in. It's just natural, you know. As the spine pushes down, you extend back, the rib cage might pop up, the belly is not going to draw in and create that intra-abdominal pressure that I'm talking about. If you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe Google it, but intra-abdominal pressure. But when the weight is in front of you and you're sort of forced out of that lumbar lordosis, that natural extended curve in your lower spine, it becomes very, 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 very important, first of all, to activate the deep abdominal muscles like your pelvic basin and your transversus abdominis and all the muscles that are in and around here that tighten, that draw in order to create air pressure in the abdominals. And the natural tendency would be for it to be very, very high. Now, I mean, I'm putting an asterisk even next to this because most people have got such dysfunctional deep abdominal walls. I mean, men, because there's way too much processed food and chemicals in our environment that cause intra-abdominal or viscerosomatic inhibition. I've spoken about this before, where the muscles just don't work very properly. Women, they've got these huge pelvic basins, and then they have babies, and they've got like all types of bloating every month going on down there. So the tendency is to have that viscerosomatic inhibition once again, where the muscles just don't work. But if we do some of the things that I guess I'll teach you guys another time, and we reintegrate those muscles to produce intra-abdominal pressure so that you can bend forward properly, there would be a great amount of pressure in that region in order to produce the bend move. Okay, so that's it. That's part one. Deadlifts are not squats. I'll be back with part two.